Okay, so first off, perhaps I ought to apologise. I did say on Facebook I'd try and have this video, this defence of anti-theism online, back end of last week, but I haven't managed to do that. And also, this probably will be slightly less structured than a lot of videos that I make, and they're not particularly well structured, so I suppose I ought to give you an apology for those things. Ooh, I'm so fucking sorry. Okay, so that's got the apology out the way. The reason, of course, it's not so structured is because I've got this little chap to look at after. As you can see, I've got him on the cam there, so I can see if he's okay. He's watching MTV at the moment, which probably isn't getting him off to a very good start. So the quicker I can get this video recorded, the sooner I can get back to something slightly more important, which is entertaining that little chap. And it also means that I've got all my things written down on notes. Don't worry about these little arcade symbols there. That was just a button problem with my arcade thing that I was trying to resolve. And it also means that I haven't really sorted out nose cam, which I'm hoping is going to be the next big thing. I've been following what's been happening in South Korea, and this thing, people are doing really successful, eating their meals on camera on YouTube, and then people are watching them. South Koreans, for some reason, they get a bit lonely, I think, some of them, and they like to sit and eat their meals watching other people eat their meals on YouTube. So I thought I'd kind of jump the gun, preempt what I think might be the next big thing, which might be looking up people's nostrils. So hoping to set up nostril cam there, but I haven't really got that sorted properly yet, so that's obviously a thing for the future. Then again, maybe not. So what I wanted to do was make this defence of anti-theism against the attack of, I suppose, what you could call the anti-theists. There's a certain sort of bigotry and prejudice that seems to have arisen in the last year or two. In fact, I tell you what, let's jump on the hyperbole bandwagon and call it Antitheismophobia. Why not? Why don't we do that? And what it seems to have happened is a whole sort of slew of different things seem to have caused this. On the one hand, all the Christophobic arguments that were made previously, you could say what the fuck you liked about Catholics, make as many sweeping, stupid generalisations as you like. Nobody gave a crap, as evidenced by the fact that will have been the first time in your life that you will have ever heard the term Christophobia, I would very much imagine. But making those same arguments towards Islam and Muslims has been labelled Islamophobia. Of course, there is some genuine Islamophobia out there, but it isn't. Let's not worry about that. Let's just use it as a smear term, and it's a smear term that's very often applied to anti-theists when they make those same arguments towards Islam and Muslims as they've made for so many years towards Christians without anybody seemingly batting an eyelid. And that in itself came to a head very recently with this Chapel Hill shooting, which I haven't commented directly on. I really like to comment directly on things like that. It seems like you're kind of piggybacking off the incident somewhat. But what I will say is this: there's some kind of debate. I've heard it said the guy was actually a deist and he wasn't an atheist, but he was certainly seemed to be an anti-theist. And as I'll talk about later when I talk about defining anti-theism, being a deist doesn't preclude you from being an anti-theist in some senses of the word. But whether or not his anti-theism played some part in what happened, I find a moot point. I mean, I did go on Facebook and I did issue a condemnation as an anti-theist and say that I condemn those kind of acts. I also issued a condemnation as somebody who drives a car and who parks a car, right? Because that looked like it played a part within it. And that kind of gets to the nub of what we're talking about here, which is you're talking about a nation of America of 300 million people, and it seems to me that about 90% of those people are absolutely stark raving fucking bonkers, or at least that's the kind of impression I get going on the people that I've spoken to on the internet, which probably isn't a very representative sample, it has to be said. But amongst those bonkers people, it's almost inconceivable that some of them in each and every category aren't going to do mad and dangerous things. And so it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter whether it's a religious persuasion. It doesn't matter whether you're an anti-theist. It doesn't matter whether you're a capitalist. It doesn't matter whether you're a socialist. It doesn't matter if you're a social justice worker campaigning for anything that you can get your teeth into. it really doesn't fucking matter. There are going to be some mad bastards that are in your corner that are going to do mad bastard things. There's going to be some fucker out there amongst 300 million people who hates fairy cakes to such an extent that if somebody starts a fairy cake store next to their house, they will go round and burn the fucking store down. It's not just a possibility, it's almost fucking cast iron, copper bottom guaranteed when you've got those kinds of numbers of people. So I find the whole Chapel Hill thing somewhat moot. Whether he did it on the back, whether it was a factor or not, doesn't matter. It could have been a factor. So we need to differentiate between those slightly random and sporadic things where somebody's belief could have been a factor and those beliefs that perhaps have a more general impact on people's behaviour. It could be something that's written down in scripture. It could be part of the ethos, part of the underlying philosophy that condones violence in certain sets of circumstances, and those are the kind of differentiations we have to make, not on the basis of one-off random acts, of which this appears to be the case. Now, what I want to talk about really in this is first off to try and none of what I've talked about so far is even on the fucking sheet, so that kind of shows you what we're talking about here is first off to give a kind of definition of what anti-theism is, because it seems that some people have the wrong end of the stick, and that irks me when I hear these bigoted, generalised comments about anti-theism, because I regard myself as an anti-theist. Anti-theism is defined in some ways, more or less you could say similar to the way that feminism is defined, in that there is a minimal definition that applies. Feminists will apply a minimal definition along something along the lines of if you believe in equality with respect to gender, then that is the minimal requirement for being a feminist, and that you can label yourself a feminist. Such that any comment that addresses all feminists, if it doesn't apply to people who just make those minimal definitions, is an outrage. It's not an acceptable comment. It's a stereotyping and it's a bigoted and prejudiced comment against feminists, because it's not fair, because it doesn't apply to all feminists. So what is the equivalent statement then with regard to anti-theism? And what I would say is that simply, if you compare it to atheism, which is simply a lack of belief, anti-theism goes beyond that. It's a lack of, it doesn't even actually involve a lack of belief. You could believe yourself. It's just that you regard that the world would be a better place if there was no belief in God, or a God, or gods, or if there was less belief in a God or gods, or if the world was less religious. And this is one thing that's important to bear in mind, is that anti-theism does not necessarily involve being against theism in the wider sense of the word, as including all these other things like deism. It can just involve theistic religions. It can just involve monotheistic religions, which is what some people's anti-theism is. It's not necessarily against the God concept in the larger sense of the word, but in the idea of a personal God who actually takes an interest in our affairs. So it could be that you think the world would be a better place without it, but it doesn't even have to be that. It could simply be that you don't like the idea that people believe things that just aren't true. Let me compare that with the idea of people who accept evolutionary theory and don't like creationism. Not because they think creationism leads to bad things within society, not because they think that if you accept the modern evolutionary synthesis it's going to make you a better person, but they simply don't like how anti-scientific it is and how that may impact on our thinking generally, or they just can't abide the idea that people are going through their lives believing an absolute load of fucking tosh. And that might be all your anti-theism is based upon. It's just simply you can't abide the idea that people are believing these things which you think are an absolute load of tripe. And what is wrong with that? And I've got to say at this point that if you object to the fact that anti-theists then have a tendency to go out there and proselytise their anti-theism, to go out there and try and persuade people that their religion is in error, or that the world would be a better place if people were less religious or there was less belief in God, then you have to have the same negative feelings towards Christians and towards Muslims. In fact, you yourself have to be an Islamophobe, because those two religions are proselytizing religions themselves. They are the two great proselytizing religions. If you are a member of those religions, you are expected to go out there and spread the word. That's certainly nothing that I've ever had a problem with. It makes absolute sense if you believe that God exists and that God is good and that people benefit from believing in that God. And why the fuck wouldn't you go out there and try and change people's minds? And it's the same thing if you don't believe in God, or if you look at the world around you and think, do you know what, I think this world would be a better place if there was a little less belief in God than there actually is. And that is it. That is all that it necessarily entails to be an anti-theist. And for many of us who are anti-theists, that is all it entails, which is that you think that the world would be a slightly better place if there was a little less religion and or a little less belief in God, and perhaps a desire to get that message out there, to be proactive and do something about it, in the same way that Christians and Muslims are progressive in getting it out there, in the same way that socialists and capitalists are keen to get their ideas out there, in the same way that social justice advocates are keen to get their messages of equality out there, in the same way that trade unionists are keen to get their message out there, in the same way that business leaders are keen to get their message out there, in the same way that every fucking other person on the planet wants to get their fucking message out there. So why is it so bad? Why do atheists have to shut their fucking gobs and say nothing? And if they happen to say something, then they're absolute scum that we can just trash in a way that apparently is unacceptable. Make generalizations that are unacceptable when you make those generalizations against other people. I talked about feminism earlier. It's something that I complain about, even though I'm not a feminist, and feminists rail against when people make sweeping generalizations about feminism based on outliers, based on extreme examples. People will find something, look what this feminist has said here, what an outrageous thing that is, and then hold every feminist to account for it, or suggest that that in some way reflects on everybody's feminism. It's bullshit. It's wrong when that happens, and the same people that call that out are the same people, by and large, it seems to me, that are making the same generalizations with regard to anti-theism and anti-theists, and I've got to call them on that. It's the same thing when we talk about Islamophobia. It's taking the worst example that we can see of either the religion of Islam or the behaviour of Muslims and saying, yes, this is the standard that all Islam adopts, that all Muslims adopt, and that is the light in which we're going to judge the whole religion. That is regarded as Islamophobia when that happens. It's bullshit if you call people out for doing that and then make the same fucking thing yourself when it comes to people who are anti-theists. If you want to criticise all anti-theists, then please criticise something that applies to all anti-theists and not pick the worst fucking examples. Thank you for watching this video. That's pretty much all I want to say. He's fast asleep and I can go back to him now. Bye for now.